Hello. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me fine? Morning, sir. Afternoon for you.
Good to see you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Should be starting right at 9:15, and then it'll be broadcast virtually to the theater. About 500 people in it.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I'm going to go off camera then for a second.
Yes, sir. Welcome back, sir.
Good to be back. Thanks. So is it your dad who's going to do this, or who's doing the interview?
I will be doing the interview. My dad just stopped by earlier. He said hello and thank you for doing this, and hope we're not busting your chops too much, as he put it.
Not at all. Thanks. Not at all. Why do you have the NATO banner in the background?
So we'll get to this in a moment later. I'm both an Italian and American citizen, so that partnership means a lot to me. And I bought a flag for about $4 and put it on my wall.
Very good.
Love the teamwork.
Had some great Italian partners in Cold War Europe, Bosnia, Iraq, Afghanistan.
Still in Kosovo.
And there as well, yeah.
Well, one of my goals, I'm trying to
Still in Afghanistan as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to become a fighter pilot. I'm hoping that one day I get to be at Aviano for some time at least. Work with
Great place to be. I made a lot of jumps out of there when I was a young paratrooper. It's a nice part of Italy.
Yeah, my family's from the north too, so I'm jealous of the view they have of the Alps. Very beautiful.
Lovely. Yep.
It's good for skiing too.
So where are you located?
Right now we're in Burbank, California.
Mm-hmm.
We're originally from just outside of New York and New Jersey. We moved here about 6 years ago when Warner Brothers moved out of New York. So been here for a few years. I'm a senior now, so applying everywhere. Have my academy application in, ROTC scholarship application in. So looking forward to it.
Good. What are the prospects?
Say again, sir?
What are the prospects?
Can you rephrase? Sorry.
What are the prospects for getting into the academy?
Oh, it's been quite an application process. I had to do the fitness exam. I had multiple essays to do, up to 5 recommendations. I had to get my nomination from my house rep. It's been a bunch of hurdles to go through, but I've been okay so far, and I get the decision in about March, mid-March. So.
Are you a National Merit Scholarship finalist or semi-finalist or anything like that?
I actually didn't get to take the SAT more than once, so I was kind of got screwed over there by COVID. I've registered for about 8 of them, and that's how they decide the National Merit Scholars. But
yeah.
I hold my own academically, and I have a lot of extracurriculars, and I think I'm who they're looking for. So hopefully the admissions board agrees with me. But even if that doesn't work out, I'm sure ROTC will be an awesome experience.
Are you playing any sports?
Yes, I'm on varsity swim and water polo.
How'd you do in swimming?
Pretty well. I like water polo more because it's a team sport, and I like the teamwork of it and working together, trying to score as many goals as possible. And also, you get to, it's like football in the water. It's really, I like that part of it. It's fun because the contact sport aspect of it. Swim is really clean, and it's not much fun in it. It's just pure swimming.
Takes a lot of determination to be a competitive swimmer.
I don't know how some people do it. And varsity for me was it was difficult for me. I'm not naturally a great swimmer, so I had to really work for it. Some people are all talent, and for them it's a breeze. Just about 3 minutes out now, and
Okay.
get started.
So you've got a list of questions, that would take us all afternoon and evening. So you've got to do some triage work here, I think. We're obviously we couldn't even get through the first section, I don't think, in the time that we have. So when does it end?
Let me just check again on the schedule so I don't give you a wrong answer. We have until 10 my time, so that'd be 1300 for you.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to be quick on my feet here, trying to get to as many as possible. Yeah.
Well, what you need to do is pick the ones you really want to ask, and then let me answer those. Don't
I have
be
some notes on mine just to prioritize because I knew we were going to get really a good answer is longer than we have for all these questions.
Are you a pilot yet?
Yes, sir. I have about 52 hours. I take my check ride in about a month, waiting for some scholarship money to come in. I always worried that as soon as I actually started flying, I'd get airsick or something, but turns out I love it, so I'm going to keep trying to do that. CAP is what let me fly, so they give me a scholarship and I fly in a CAP airplane, and it's been a great experience. And the weather here is a great help too, because I've only been grounded by that once or twice. All right, just about 15 seconds here. All right, hello everyone in Pearly Theater. I hope you're having a wonderful morning. I am Cadet Lieutenant Colonel Brian Damasio, and I'm very pleased for today's guest for GA. This is a colloquial with General David Petraeus. Sir, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm a retired four-star general, former CIA director, and I'm now a partner in the global investment firm KKR and chair of the KKR Global Institute. I also have various academic endeavors. I'm a private venture capitalist and on a couple of boards of the companies that KKR owns.
Thank you, sir. Obviously, very distinguished and long career. So we're going to start off with leadership here, just because that's a big theme in Civil Air Patrol. And at the core of the cadet program is leadership. And we're really thankful for the Air Force for the curriculum and guidance they've helped us create, for that whole curriculum and the program that brought me to where I am today, and many other leaders currently serving in the Air Force and retired. So what advice about leadership do you have for cadets for our age range, which is from 12 to 21?
Well, first bit of advice I would have is to recognize that life is a competitive endeavor, and you don't get a trophy or a t-shirt just for showing up in the real world. The fact is that the individuals who are proud to be average in life will get average results. And it's really those that truly achieve excellence in everything that they do who at the end of the day will receive the kinds of rewards that I assume that most individuals, if not all, who are participating in Civil Air Patrol would seek. So it starts with achieving true personal excellence. And by the way, that doesn't mean just being the best overall all the time. It also means being the best team player that you can possibly be. Second, I think I'd offer that you obviously should lead others the way that you would like to be led. And recognize, I think, or at least assume that most individuals truly do want to be all that they can be. They'd like to achieve excellence. And your job is to figure out what kind of leadership style will bring out the best in each of those who report directly to you, and then how to bring out the best in the organization collectively as well. Because leadership style should vary depending on the organization, depending on those who work directly for you, and so forth. So I think those would be the points that I would make in a very general way to individuals who are engaged in your activity. And frankly, just the fact that individuals have raised their hand and joined this particular activity, I think speaks very well of them from the get-go.
Thank you, sir. I think I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of amazing young people just from my entire cadet career, from when I joined as a 12-year-old to where I am now, hand in hand. So, obviously you have a lot of experience talking about that. And when you started, it's like when your leadership began, let's say at West Point, how have you grown since then? How did that experience at a service academy help you become the leader you are today? And how did it prepare you?
Well, I think leadership is the result of three different groups of activities. The first is actually formal leadership education. In the military, as I'm sure you know, there are sequential courses that you go through. There's the pre-commissioning course, which takes place at West Point or ROTC for a commissioned officer. There's a basic course, an advanced course, a staff college, a war college. And at each level, you are taught more about leadership that is appropriate for the level at which you hope to be a leader once again. So that's the formal component of it. The next really important component is actually exercising leadership and observing others who are doing the same. You can learn an awful lot by watching really great leaders, and you can learn a lot by watching some who are not so great. And you can take the best and also realize that there are some aspects or some attributes that you don't want to demonstrate to others. And then finally, and I think a very important part of anyone's leadership development is the self-study in which individuals engage. I was a big reader. I still am. I read innumerable biographies about military leaders in the past, sought to learn from them, read biographies about other leaders and other walks of life, national leaders, and all the rest of that. And I think there's a great deal to be gleaned from the experiences of those who came before us. So again, if you approach it in that way, where you are trying to get truly formal education on leadership, because there is a whole body of knowledge about that, and tactics, techniques, and procedures on leadership, exercise of leadership and watching others who are doing the same, and then your self-study, that's the way I think you develop as a leader, but you should never, ever stop learning. It is always about trying to identify lessons that need to be learned, but are only truly learned when you actually put them into practice.
I think you touched on something great there, is your academic background and how that plays into you becoming a better leader and looking at history and using that as a resource. And one of your strengths is you, sir, are a textbook example of a soldier scholar. And you attended West Point in Princeton and have your doctorate, and you were a professor at times as well. So how important has your formal education process, you mentioned reading, but your formal education process in your development and your leadership style?
Well, going to a civilian graduate school, which I was warned was committing professional suicide when I did it instead of going to the Ranger Regiment, that was the greatest out of my intellectual comfort zone experience that I ever had. I had several other types of experiences like that. I went to a fellowship at Georgetown instead of doing the war college, and then I didn't even finish the fellowship. I went to Haiti to become the chief of operations for the United Nations force. Those experiences I often felt were even more important to my development than were the actual normal formal activities that you take throughout a career, because they do get you out of your intellectual comfort zone. It's really important in life to understand that there are seriously bright individuals who don't see the world at all the same way we do, who view it through a different prism, who have literally different assumptions about how would people interact in the absence of some central organizing entity, in the absence of a Leviathan, to use Hobbes' term. And would life be nasty, shortage, and brutish, as he said, or would it all be everyone hugging, as say some others postulated? These are really important experiences, and I treasure those that I had. In fact, when I was a commander in Iraq in the very beginning as a 2-star general, keeping in mind that I was there as a 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, ultimately commanding the surge in Iraq. But in the very beginning, we seemed to have it right. And journalists and others would come up and say, how is it that you guys have figured this out? And it doesn't seem that all the others have. And I actually said, in many respects, it was that out of my intellectual comfort zone experience. It was an awareness that there are people who have very different views about life, who have they're from different ethnic groups, different religious convictions, different sects within religion, different tribes, political parties, all of this. And again, that experience that I had at Princeton as a graduate student was invaluable in that regard. There were also obviously some very practical areas of political philosophy and economics that were very useful at certain levels as well. But that education was invaluable. And it also was just part of that constant thirst for learning that I talked about earlier, that generally is a hallmark of almost all successful leaders.
So, you talk about your experience in Princeton and how it's outside your comfort zone and how that really grew you, and then an example from Iraq there. So, from your experience, how should our cadets prepare for university, even as an undergraduate? What lessons did you learn going outside your comfort zone from West Point to Princeton that you think our cadets going to college nowadays can use for their own lives?
Well, again, first I'd come back to the fact that life is a competitive endeavor. And your choices in life are expanded or contracted by how well you do at each subsequent level. Needless to say, how one does in high school determines to a great deal whether you can get into a truly exceptional university, a good one, or perhaps not so good. Again, the person who is proud to be average is going to end up with an average trajectory in life by and large. So there has to be a real sense of trying to be the very best that one can be, noting again that it's not just an individual activity, it's also a team sport. You want to be the best team player that you can be as well. So just being very, very serious about the various facets of high school in terms of academics, in terms of athletics, in terms of leadership and other activities, the same in university and the same, frankly, in graduate school. Again, the rewards go to those who truly do demonstrate excellence. And that's what everyone should be seeking to demonstrate.
That's awesome. I think that's definitely something that some people forget when they start high school. Like, I have the rest of my life ahead of me, but sometimes they don't realize that each stage of their life impacts the next greatly, and proportionately too. So let's go back a little and what first drew you to service? Because you started at West Point from what I know, and went on to have an outstanding career. But what got the ball rolling for you? What inspired you to apply to West Point and start that career?
Well, I grew up 7 miles north of West Point, literally right around Storm King Mountain in the Hudson River Valley. We literally grew up in the shadow of West Point, or at least of the mountain that overlooked West Point. There were so many aspects of West Point and of graduates of the U.S. Military Academy that permeated our town. I had teachers who had been professors at West Point earlier in their lives. We had even our soccer coach had actually coached at West Point. In fact, he coached them to a national championship during the war years. He was doing it for $1 a year, basically in his 60s or whatever, just for something to do and to contribute to the community. And we won the championship in our senior year, which was, needless to say, a great thrill. So I really looked up to these individuals. I think a lot in life is you're trying to be like someone you admire, that old ad about be like Mike. And for me, Mike was a West Point cadet, a West Point graduate, a West Point officer. And again, you just have to understand how many West Pointers were in that community and how significant a role they played in the community. My Sunday school teacher was a coach at West Point, the ski team, which I was an athlete on as well. So I think when you grow up in that environment and you admire those who are there and are graduates of the academy, it's a pretty natural inclination, I think, to apply there and to go there. And then as time went on, I found that I loved the variety that a military career provided. It's very visceral. I was a pretty decent athlete through college, played 2 different sports at the intercollegiate level, and very much thrived on the physical component of infantry life, jumping out of planes in the middle of the night at 850 feet, going through Ranger School. And by the way, and trying to be the best I could in Ranger School, and actually won all 3 of the awards there. And what happens is, as you establish this record of achievement, you're no longer having to ask the personnel folks for an assignment, because people are pulling you to their assignments. And I was privileged to work then as the aide for the Chief of Staff of the Army, a speechwriter for the NATO commander, executive officer for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, all of which, by the way, were also fantastic vantage points for watching senior leaders in the execution of their leadership responsibilities. So I really loved the fact that you could be very physical on one day and grad school the next, and commanding forces after that. It was a great combination of intellectual, physical, and leadership all in one career. And just when you get tired of, carrying a rucksack for 3 or 4 years, and, in the middle of the night doing the walk to daylight, as we used to call it, after a night jump, then something else comes along where you're doing something that's very cerebral for a period of time. When you're about tired of that, you get back into the physical component, perhaps as a leader. And again, I treasured those experiences throughout this 37 years that I was privileged to wear the uniform of the U.S. Army.
And for our cadets who are trying to follow in similar footsteps and attend their respective service academies, what advice do you have for them looking back that you think can help them become the best officer and the best cadet and the best applicant they can be?
Well, first of all, you got to get in. And again, getting in is a function of these generally 3 categories of performance. It's your academic performance, it's your performance in extracurricular activities, particularly in leadership roles, because they want a sense of whether the individual can lead his or her peers and so forth. And it's obviously your athletic activities. And again, those who have excelled in all 3 of those will have a pretty good competitive opportunity to get to a service academy. And then, of course, it's about competing at that level. And again, competing to be the best that you can be, and to be the best that you can be in contributing to the effort of your organization, of your team, of your squadron, company, platoon, whatever it may be. And always keeping that in mind. I mean, as late as when I was a 2-star general commanding the great 101st Airborne Division in the fight to Baghdad, I realized that the best contribution we could make was to give up on our hope to air assault into history by taking Baghdad International Airport by a heliborne assault. We had 254 helicopters, so it's an extraordinary fleet, the largest in the world of any division, 2 or 3 times the size of any other typical division. But I realized that the best contribution we could make was to support the armored and mechanized infantry brigade that was more ideally suited for what we were facing as the closer we got to Baghdad. And so when that commander called up and asked if we had any extra 155 millimeter howitzer ammo, I said, not only do we have it for you, but I'll give you the entire unit so we don't have to download it, take it off the guns. It'll get to you faster. We're just driving the entire unit to you. I said, what else do you need? He said, how about an infantry battalion? I said, where do you want it? And I gave him the battalion that I actually commanded when I was a lieutenant colonel. So we did everything we could to help them be. We put our 72 Apaches literally out in front of them every night, trying to just vacuum up the desert floor and everything else of armored, mechanized air defense and missile and rocket forces that might impede their advance. And lo and behold, they were exactly the right force for the thunder run that ultimately collapsed the regime and Saddam Hussein and all of his kleptocratic cronies. So again, it's always about trying to be the best you can be and trying to contribute the most you can to the organization of which you're privileged to be a part.
I think that first invasion is probably a textbook military, probably taught in schools today. It was very, very fast, very effective, record speed there. And many of our cadets.
It was a little bit tougher on the ground, in all honesty. I mean, with hindsight, it seems like it went very quickly. There were very, very tough fights during the fight to Baghdad. And there were periods where the enemy was quite tenacious and quite determined and quite adaptable. But ultimately, what we had clearly was enough to overwhelm them. And again, they realized that at a certain point, and then they just started to crumble and then collapse.
So many of our cadets see those Apaches you mentioned, and the Nighthawks that helped you, and all that equipment, the howitzers and whatnot. And they're inspired by that, and they want to be engineers, and they want to be in the drawing boards at Lockheed or Northrop, designing the equipment that you would use in a war, just like you did then. How do you value STEM degrees in the 21st century for our aspiring engineers?
Well, I think they're clearly what provide the skills that will be most relevant to what it is that the economy will require in the future. It already does. I mean, we're already very, very short in a whole host of different areas, but particularly when it comes to a variety of different cyber skills, everything from, again, systems integration, software development, all of these types of skills are in very, very short supply in the United States. And we often, in fact, take immigrants from all around the world to try to satisfy the extraordinary demand that, again, far outstrips the supply that we're producing organically in the United States. So those skills, I think, are very, very important. But I also think it is very significant that individuals develop an ability to think critically and to communicate in writing and in speech. The truth is that all of those great skills will be vastly more valuable if the individuals can write well, communicate well, brief well, speak well. Those are absolutely crucial skills as well. And so I'm always a bit concerned if someone is just so completely into the STEM courses and then tends to ignore some of these other aspects of education, of a liberal arts education, that I think are universally valued and always in short supply. I mean, there are never enough people that again can communicate effectively and in writing and in speech. So I think you want to get that very good, solid foundation in those skills, and you build on it with the technical, again, the science, technology, engineering, and math skills that are part of STEM.
So something that's that the academy looks for, in my experience as an applicant, is the well-rounded applicant, and I think you just touched on that with having strong ability to communicate and think critically, and also be able to excel in mathematics and engineering. And I think that's the type of leader that the 21st century needs. And kind of, I'm going to pivot a bit on what the 21st century needs. Cybersecurity and cyber warfare, which is a huge part of the Civil Air Patrol program. And 2017, I attended a talk with you and author Fred Kaplan, where you discussed cyber warfare. And CAP really values that. And we have our own program called Cyber Patriot, where we train our young cadets on how to be well-versed in the cyber realm, look into cybersecurity careers, and really build up that gap, as we saw recently with situations like SolarWinds. So how do you value preparing our cadets for cyber education and cybersecurity?
Well, another wonderful field in which to have some expertise, because clearly it is one of the major threats to our national security. It's also a major threat to a variety of other activities, not the least of which is avoiding a variety of scams, cyber ransomware, I mean, there are just so many challenges out there in the cyber realm. I'm on the board of the largest pure play cybersecurity services firm in the world, Optiv. And again, the threat array is just constantly evolving, and it's getting ever more diabolically clever and sophisticated. And SolarWinds clearly is the most sophisticated hack in history, and one, the extent of which we won't know perhaps for years. it is so broad and so extensive because, of course, it was conveyed through a software service that essentially provides updates and patches and so forth that were used by thousands of different companies with presumably millions of different endpoints and devices. So again, a very, very challenging hack. And it's particularly concerning, frankly, that this was not discovered by the Einstein system that government has installed and developed, nor by one of the government cyber agencies. It was discovered by a civilian cybersecurity firm, FireEye, which happens to have a tremendously talented group of threat hunters. And it was almost by happenstance. I mean, they discovered it merely because some alert member of their staff noticed that a particular individual had 2 phone numbers listed for the dual factor authentication. And they just called up to confirm that he had actually added the additional device, and the answer was no. And that started them then burrowing in and trying to discover what had taken place. And they ultimately had to just tear apart an entire huge software programs to find out where this code had been inserted and then what it did. So again, a very, very sophisticated operation, one which also, of course, used, if you will, servers and so forth that were inside the United States. So the addresses were domestic. And that meant that you don't have NSA and other organizations in the intelligence community that are focused on foreign intelligence operations, because you don't look inward with NSA or, again, the CIA, which I was privileged to lead as well. So again, a very, very disturbing hack, one that shows how far adversaries have progressed in terms of sophistication, and something that on which undoubtedly thousands of people actually worked to build this amount of software that was inserted into the extraordinary software that SolarWinds was updating.
So from the 2008 cyber attack on the Pentagon to Stuxnet, the United States has been at the forefront of both offensive and defensive cyber warfare. Do you see a role for a possible 7th uniform service in the coming years to help defend that threat?
Yeah, I think that is a possibility. I was one who called for Cyber Command to be established as a full-fledged combatant command years before it ultimately was. Secretary Gates and I were 2 big proponents of that, but the national authorities just delayed it. And it was only during the previous administration that this was finally completed. It should have been completed a long time ago. And there still is a lot of work going on around the big ideas that will guide, what is cyber command? Is it a geographic command whose geography is not Southwest Asia or European command or Indo-Pacific or something like that, a region? Maybe it's cyberspace, but how do you actually define cyberspace? Is it a military service that should be able to recruit, train, equip, educate, assign, retain, and so forth? Is it like Special Operations Command, which actually adds to the skills of the general purpose forces and then provides them to the geographic combatant commanders and the Joint Special Operations Command? The truth is, it's probably all 3 of the above, and we're still working out really what it will be and whether it could be, again, an additional service. I am a little cautious always about additional services, and I like the way space has been made a service where you still have it underneath a department so that you don't create all of that additional overhead that goes with a department. You need another military academy. You have to have all these other, and as valuable as those institutional elements are in the training, education, development, equipping, and all the rest of that, at the end of the day, they are not out there on the front lines, again, on the ground, in the air, in sea, at space, whatever. And you want to have that, the tooth to tail ratio, be as high as you possibly can while still ensuring that all those very valuable and important tasks are performed. So again, the question of whether it is an independent service of its own, I'm a little bit ambivalent about, although I do think it should have a great deal more of the responsibilities and authorities that go with being a service. So we'll see how it evolves. It still, frankly, has a lot of growing to do around the organizational architecture for cybercom and the various components of it, which include, of course, NSA. But NSA also has a foot in the intelligence community, and it has a very large number of civilian individuals as well. So all of that's got to be crafted, and you've got to get the big ideas right to guide that. And that work is still ongoing.
And something we've been touching on overarching here is definitely the whole national security aspect and the foreign policy aspect of it. And a large number of our cadets are working towards those types of careers. You know, you mentioned NSA and service branches earlier, and I'd say a large number of our cadets want to do those sorts of things in the future. So that, you know, our generation is going into the 21st century. So what do you see as the biggest national security threat that we are going to be facing when I commission or my fellow cadets commission?
Well, first of all, of course, your generation's well into the 21st century. And it will certainly step into the leadership roles in another decade or two. Look, I think the big issue of the day is the evolution of the US-China relationship. I think that relationship is the most important in the entire world. It may be more important than the relationship among all other countries put together. Because if there's a mistake, if there are miscalculations and so forth, that could be quite catastrophic. But you have the world's two superpowers, one of which has evolved very, very rapidly over the course of the last 41 or so years since Deng Xiaoping welcomed the world to China, the fastest economic growth that any country ever has remotely achieved, and one that is now very much spreading its wings in a whole variety of different ways, including in terms of its military capabilities and reach. And again, it's vital that the US and China determine a way to have engagement, to cooperate in those areas like climate and countering the pandemic and the economic downturn associated with it, compete in a variety of other ways, but do it as fairly as is possible. And then there will be areas where our core interests are truly conflictual, where they collide. And there we need to make sure that our deterrent capabilities are very, very well recognized, that our capabilities and the will to use them are understood by our potential adversaries, so that we avoid some kind of military collision that would be just catastrophic and could be catastrophic in a nuclear age. So I think that is the central issue really of the day. There's plenty of others. There's resurgent Russia, there's North Korea and Iran, which don't accept the status quo as at present. There are still Islamist extremists that we have to pursue, and we need sustained commitments against them, and we can't get tired of that. We just need to have a sustained commitment to continue to keep the pressure on them, doing it ideally through our host nation partners and in support and enabling them. There are the sophisticated cyber threats that, as I mentioned, are ever more diabolically creative. And there's a host of other challenges, including some obviously at home, where the hyper-partisanship and the differences have resulted in such horrific events as we saw on our nation's capital, the assault on our nation's capital on 6 January. So we've got to figure out how to come together as a nation as well, recognize that we will have differences with one another, but also understanding that we need to resolve those through dialogue and through democratic processes rather than through the use of force, if you will.
I mean, absolutely. I think the size of our two economies, the U.S. and China, plus the conflicting interests and a free and open Indo-Pacific, and what the empire they seem to want to build is definitely cause for great concern and a conflict point, which I fear that I may have to get involved in. If I get involved in the Air Force, I don't think anybody wants to see that happen. The size of our two countries would mean something of horrific scale, and it's a big jump. Just going to pivot a little here from leading the world's most capable, largest intelligence apparatus to a cadet or an aspiring officer or a leader on my level in their community. But what lessons did you learn there as DCIA that you think could apply to our lives?
Well, the lessons were very similar. Again, the CIA workforce is an extraordinary one. It is arguably the most talented with which I was ever privileged to work. They're silent warriors, as we term them, unsung heroes, because of course they can't even tell their neighbors what it is that they do, or even their own families in many cases. And, I think what you learn there is that there are seriously patriotic individuals who are more than willing to soldier on in the shadows and to pursue missions that are larger than self in situations that can be very, very challenging, sometimes without the kind of backup that you would normally expect would be there for military operations. And again, just exceptional individuals. And it's a privilege to be part of organizations like that. And I think that, again, what you are learning, presumably from what you're currently engaged in, is that, you all relish this, in a sense, mission that is larger than self. That is really the essence of service in uniform and service, frankly, in the CIA and in plenty of other walks of life as well. But the privilege of performing a mission that is of consequence to one's country, and to do it with others who also feel privileged to do the same, is really very, very special. And I think of all of the aspects of life that you inevitably have to leave behind when you take the uniform off or stop being the head of the CIA or something, what you miss most is that sense of mission larger than self. As animated as I am about what it is that we do in the investment world to help companies develop, grow, prosper, and return more money to investors than they gave us, and all of this, which is very, very significant for our country's pension funds and university endowments and all the rest of that. But of course, performing a mission like that of the surge in Iraq, where I was privileged to command at a very desperate moment, and then with our great young men and women on the front lines turning it around, that's a privilege that is just beyond compare, and one that is very, very rare in life to begin with. What I think, again, all the way at the level of Civil Air Patrol should always recognize is that luck does play a role in life. Timing does matter. You can have all the skills in the world, but if they're not called on when you are at that point in your life, then okay, you spent all your life preparing for something and you didn't actually ever do it. But regardless, you will have served life well. But every now and then, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And you've spent your lifetime preparing for something, and all of a sudden President Bush or the Secretary of Defense calls and say, "Hey, I want you to lead the surge in Iraq." And that is luck and timing, but you have to be ready for it. And I'd like to believe that I'd spent an entire lifetime preparing for those moments, or the surge in Afghanistan, or again, CIA director, or a few others along the way where we exercised real change management. I mean, where we really revolutionized what it was that we were doing. And you have to be ready for those moments, and you spend your entire life preparing for them. And that preparation starts all the way at the point where you are right now, and it should continue throughout one's life. And even, once your major professional endeavors are behind you, there are so many wonderful opportunities to contribute. I mean, tonight I'll be on teaching a group of seriously bright graduate students at Yale, which I treasure. I've been a professor at USC, where you saw the event with Bob Kaplan, a fellow at Harvard, professor at City University, New York Honors College, West Point, all these others. I mean, these are amazingly rewarding experiences to work with very, very bright, serious, hardworking, brilliant young people who are trying to develop themselves, who are trying to be the very best that they can be. And those experiences are worth everything in life.
I think something that you've been kind of touching on throughout today has been teamwork, and that being a massive part in becoming a leader and delegating, working with friends, partners, and in your case, allies. So again, as I mentioned earlier, before the interview, I am a dual citizen with a NATO country, and I value that relationship and the cooperation and the friendship and teamwork that Italy and the United States have enjoyed for the past almost century. So what lessons about teamwork did you learn working with allies? And can you describe what it was like to command forces like the multinational force that were from around the world? And what unique leadership challenges did that present?
Well, Winston Churchill got it right, as he did on so many other things, when he said that the only thing worse than working with allies is working without them. And what he was getting at here is that it takes a lot of coalition maintenance effort, coalition management. To have a huge coalition, I think we had over 60 countries in the coalition in Afghanistan, for example, and, being realistic about what each brings and doesn't bring. Every single country other than the United States had caveats. In other words, it had limits on what its forces were allowed to do. Each country had strengths, and each country typically had some shortcomings. And we generally had to compensate for the shortcomings to mitigate the risks that resulted from them by providing the capabilities those forces were lacking from US forces. We even had one country that was not allowed to conduct offensive operations. Now, that's a fairly significant limitation. And what we did then was we gave them a company or two of the 82nd Airborne Division, and they provided that capability so that when they had to go on offensive operations, it was the US unit that did it, and then they could go to the rescue if that was required. They were authorized to conduct, again, the kind of defensive or quick reaction force operations. It was a very capable force. But it just happened to have that political caveat. Every single force had that, even those of our very best partner, the UK. I realized when a subordinate commander wanted to move the UK forces a few villages over in a very tough province, Helmand province, and keep in mind how difficult the casualties had been for the UK until our very substantial increase in forces. But the next thing you knew, the prime minister was in Kabul, and we ultimately were not allowed to do what I thought should have been allowed just at a tactical commander's level, much less at my level as a strategic commander. So again, that's the reality. You acknowledge it, you accept it, you identify again the strengths, you play to those, you identify the weaknesses, the shortcoming, you compensate for those. And that's how you get the best out of the different coalition contingents that you are privileged to have as part of your force. But, it can get pretty interesting at times. I realized one time that I was hosting a particular prime minister and his minister of defense and minister of foreign affairs and chief of defense staff and all the rest of this stuff. And I was giving that individual more minutes of my time than his country was providing us soldiers. But again, coalition management is a huge task. It's a hugely important task. You've got to maintain that coalition, and that's what very senior coalition leaders do. And if you can't do that, you're not going to have that coalition survive beyond your tenure.
Awesome. That was a really good answer, so thank you. And again, I think playing to the individual strengths and weaknesses of everybody on a team is definitely something that we can apply in our own lives on a much lower level than managing a multinational force with over 30, almost 30 countries. And I'd like to end on a note. A few hundred years ago, President Grant. So today is President's Day, and I found it fitting to talk about one of our best. As a member of the Grant Foundation Board, I believe you have a unique outlook as a retired general and soldier scholar to talk about what makes him so unique. So what first drew you to him, and what do you think he has as a strength in comparison to other traditionally great presidents such as President Washington or Lincoln?
Well, what attracted me to Grant, frankly, was reading a book called Grant Takes Command. It's a great classic by Bruce Catton, one of the great Civil War historians. And it just happened that it was on the table next to my bunk when I was commanding the surge in Iraq. Someone had given it to me beforehand, and I threw it in a rucksack, and it ended up getting unpacked and being there. And I started reading, and I realized that, that his qualities were so extraordinary. All of it in a very modest individual, by the way, very taciturn, not on transmit the way many that achieve high rank can be when they get there. He had this indomitable determination, but it was quiet. He just had absolute persistence. He could see a battlefield in his mind. And this is a day when the generals wrote all their own orders. So there was no staff around them. The staff basically, the aides just took the orders to the respective commanders to whom they were addressed. And he could visualize a battle both in terms of space and in terms of time, how it would unfold, and give orders to that effect. And it turned out that he demonstrated brilliance at the tactical level, the land between the lakes battles. So that's a division and brigades below you, a 1 or a 2-star general. Then at the operational level, with the battle at Vicksburg, which is one of the greatest of all maneuver battles in all time. And then at the strategic level, when Lincoln finally brings him east and puts him in charge of all of the Union forces, after trying virtually every other senior leader, every one of whom was found wanting in that position. And Grant just quietly put together the overall strategic plan, which ultimately saved the Union because it achieved victories that ensured Lincoln's reelection in 1864, which was not a sure thing until Sherman's victory in Atlanta and Sheridan's victory in the Shenandoah Valley. So he literally did save the Union. But above all, again, he had this beyond modesty. I mean, he wore the uniform of a private. He did have shoulder straps that had the number of stars that he had at any given time, but that was about it. And so the contrast with other generals was very, very significant. But the genius that he had, this ability to absorb a lot of detail, to listen to all of it, and then to give the orders that would reverse a bad situation, such as he did at Chattanooga, where they came in and his forces were literally encircled. They had to fight to get in. Or in bloody Shiloh, where at the end of the first day, Sherman and he were surprised. It was the worst battle probably they had during the entire war. Their forces are clinging to the Tennessee River as ships are delivering additional reinforcements with which Grant hopes to reverse the tide the next morning. And it did. And he ultimately owned the field at the end of that battle. But the outcome was by no means certain. And Sherman came up to him in the dark and he said, "Well, Grant, we've had the devil's own day today, haven't we?" And Grant said, "Yep, lick him tomorrow, though." And that was the kind of spirit that is required. And during the surge in Iraq, I remember telling that very story, and lick 'em tomorrow became a bit of a response to a very, very tough day. And these are the qualities that he had. There were also many other really impressive qualities, but I think it was in truth as a soldier that he was most outstanding. And frankly, there is no other US Army general who has demonstrated true brilliance at the tactical, operational, and strategic level, at least not without some blunders along the way, which he really avoided throughout his career. Certainly as a president, there were many outstanding achievements. There were also some disappointing developments in a variety of different ways as well. And you would never equate him as the president to one such as the founder, George Washington or Lincoln, who again saved the Union as the president and freed the slaves and took these very dramatic decisions. But certainly Grant, with Reconstruction, sought to do a very the honorable thing. He tried to do that with respect to Indians. There were a variety of other initiatives that he took were impressive, but then there were some, unfortunately, where he did occasionally put too much trust in individuals whose behavior really in the end didn't warrant that trust. It almost was what brought Grant down at the end, because he'd given all of his money to this very seemingly brilliant investor, only to find out that that individual was the Bernie Madoff of his day, and he had lost all the money. And so that's why Grant had to write his memoirs. He had the only way he could provide for his family was by doing that. And he was doing it while facing throat cancer that was getting worse and worse and worse. And he was literally writing for his life. And he finished the final edits a day or so before he ultimately died. And that memoir was the bestseller of its day. Mark Twain was his publisher and had a very novel way of compensating the family. They did exceedingly well as a result of that. So even again, in his dying years, Grant had that indomitable determination and saw the task through to the end. I think, again, those kinds of qualities, especially when you're in a tough spot. And as the commander of the surge in Iraq, there was not a tougher spot. I mean, that was, on the one hand, the most awesomely awesome experience imaginable on a good day. But we had less than this number of good days during the time that I commanded that in 19 and a half months. And it's looking at the example that someone like Grant provided, that you draw inspiration, you realize others have been through very similar situations, and you get fortitude from that. And you, again, that example was inspirational to me. And that's frankly why I have been so happy to be on the Grant Monument Association board, to do quite a bit academically, if you will, to try to be a Grant scholar and to promote those books and other initiatives that are ensuring that the appreciation of Grant is what it should be, rather than what was run down, frankly, by Southern historians in the previous century when they were trying to build up the lost cause mythology and all the rest of that. In fact, there's a great new book out called Robert E. Lee and Me. The Southern comes to reckoning with the lost cause mythology that I commend to all of you. I've interviewed the author of that. He's a retired one-star former history department head at West Point twice already, and we'll do it another 2 times at least. So with that, look, it's really been a privilege to be with you. Brian, you've guided this very, very nicely. And again, a pleasure to spend some time and to offer a few reflections to you and your hundreds or thousand fellow cadets, remembering again that life is a competitive endeavor.
Thank you, sir. I can tell you that this was very enlightening. I have the chat open here, and I have a little feed of the producers, and they're all blown away. You've done an amazing job, and you have a lot of experience that you can draw from to really give us advice that will improve our lives and hopefully the course of history. So thank you so much, and to the cadets in Pearly Theater, thank you for watching, and I hope you've learned something, and I'm sure you have.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, sir.